let's talk about the Cold War. You know the story, right? Or at least the one we think we know. It's this epic tale that didn't just define a century, it literally built the world we're standing in today. But what if that simple black and white story, good guys versus bad guys, is just, well, a story? We're going to peel back some of those layers and see what was really going on.
Yeah, this. I mean, we've all seen this 1,000 times, haven't we? America versus the Soviet Union. Capitalism, communism. Good, evil. It's so clean, so simple, it makes for a great movie plot. But the real world? Man, it's never that simple. Is that the whole story? No way. Not even close. And honestly, the real story is way more fascinating.
So, for decades, this was the accepted version of reality. The world, supposedly, was split right down the middle. You had the Iron Curtain literally carving up continents. Every single political move, every international incident was filtered through this one lens, us versus them. And believe me, this wasn't just in the news. It was everywhere. Our movies, our books. It was the background music to daily life for generations. Okay, so let's tackle the first big myth head on. The idea that this was just a two-player game. It's so easy to picture it like a chess match between two grandmasters, isn't it? But the board was way, way more crowded than that. The US and the USSR were definitely the heavyweights, no doubt about it. But they were not the only ones playing. And oh man, the pressure was on. The message coming out of both Washington and Moscow was crystal clear. You're either with us or you're with them. There was no middle ground, or so they wanted everyone to believe. They were constantly trying to scoop up allies, these client states that relied on them for money or weapons. But here's the kicker. A lot of the world wasn't interested in being a pawn on someone else's chessboard. And this quote just nails it. We do not wish to be a pawn in anyone's game. I mean, think about it. You've got all these nations, especially in Africa and Asia, who had just fought for their independence from colonial empires. The absolute last thing they wanted was to immediately sign up to be someone else's subordinate. They had their own path to forge. And this wasn't just a few countries making some noise. This was a movement. The non-aligned movement, founded in '61. Look at these numbers. We're talking about almost 2/3 of the members of the United Nations. Let that sink in. The majority of nations on Earth, including huge players like India and Egypt, basically formed a third bloc whose entire purpose was to say, hey, superpowers, we're not picking a side. We're doing our own thing. All right, that brings us to the next big myth, that this whole thing was purely a war of ideas. It's easy to sell the story of freedom versus tyranny, right? It's a powerful narrative. But if you want to know what was really going on, you got to do what they say in the movies, follow the money and the resources. Because once you do that, the picture changes a lot. Okay, so check this out. It's the stated ideology versus the underlying interests. On the left, you've got the stuff you'd hear in a political speech, spreading freedom and democracy, liberating the working class. Sounds pretty noble, right? But look at the right column. Spreading freedom often meant securing access to oil. Containing communism, sometimes translated to protecting corporate interests. At the end of the day, this was just as much a war for economic dominance as it was a war of ideas. And this chart really breaks it down for us. When you analyze why the superpowers actually intervened in other countries, ideological purity is just one slice of the pie, and maybe not even the biggest slice. You see huge chunks for economic gain, resource control, and just plain old strategic positioning. It was a battle for hearts and minds, sure, but it was also a bare-knuckle brawl for control of the planet's resources. Okay, now we have to talk about maybe the biggest and frankly the most tragic myth of all, the name itself, the Cold War. Yeah. Because while it may have been cold in Washington and Moscow in the sense that they never dropped bombs on each other, for millions upon millions of people across the globe, this war was anything but cold. It was searingly, devastatingly hot. And this is where we get the term proxy war. Basically, the US and the USSR were like two fighters who were too scared to get in the ring themselves because they knew it would be total annihilation. So instead, they picked substitutes. They'd find a local conflict, a civil war, and just pour in weapons, money, and advisors, turning these countries into brutal arenas for their own ideological rivalry. And don't think this was a rare occurrence. It was constant. Just look at this timeline. The 50s, you've got the Korean War. The 60s, Vietnam. The 70s, the Angolan Civil War. The 80s, the Soviet-Afghan War. It was relentless. Decade after decade, a new part of the world was set on fire, fueled by superpower competition. And the human cost? It's just staggering. Over 20 million people. Just sit with that number for a second. 20 million. And the vast majority of them were civilians. Men, women, children, caught on the crossfire. So you tell me, was this a Cold War? For them, it was the deadliest war imaginable. To call it cold, it's not just inaccurate, it's a deep injustice to their memory.
So you might be thinking, okay, this is heavy stuff, but why does it matter now? It's all in the past, right? Well, no, because the stories we believe about our past directly influence the decisions we make in the present. If we want to navigate the world we have today, we absolutely have to understand the world that was.
So let's recap the big takeaways here. First, the world wasn't a two-player game. It was multipolar. Second, economics and resources were just as important as ideology, if not more so. And third, and most importantly, for millions of people, the conflict was brutally, horribly hot. The simple stories we're told, they almost always hide a much more complex and often uncomfortable truth.
When we look at a map of the world today, all the hotspots, the political tensions, the strange borders, they didn't just pop into existence. The DNA of those conflicts, their roots, can almost always be traced back to this period. Understanding these hidden facts about the Cold War isn't just a history lesson. It's like getting a more accurate map for the world we've inherited.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If the official sanitized story of the biggest conflict of the 20th century turned out to be so misleading, what myths are we living through right now? What obvious truths about our own time, about our own global struggles, will people in the future look back on and just shake their heads, wondering how we could have missed what was really going on?